So, just to say, Madam Speaker, that the government business were very well attended, and the results of which will soon be told. And the real good story is to say that the tourism industry is back on track in full, and that the recovery is now 99% complete. To make the further point, Madam Speaker, that the cruise tourism, which was lagging behind in the recovery, is now scheduled to be back on track for 2023-24, with not just the 1.6 million packs that we had before in 2019, but now will be exceeded. We were able to enable a full recovery of a number of the itineraries that we had, and I'm to report to the House that we will be having just a little over 1 million packs this Christmas into the middle of next year from 2 of our major cruise lines that operate in Jamaica. And the third one is giving us double the number of calls that we will have. So between Royal Caribbean, Carnival, and MSC, Jamaica will see somewhere in the region of 1.3 million packs in 23-24. Port Royal, yes, Port Royal is on. We've worked very hard on that. We're going to be getting a few calls to Port Royal, not at the level that we anticipated because of how the recovery has been, that some of the smaller vessels, particularly those that were tendered, are not going to be en route as in the past, because larger vessels are now coming, and the 23 new vessels that are coming in the next year, 16 of which is by one particular cruise line, will all be mega size vessels bringing packs of 4,000 plus. That is a challenge for Port Royal, as you would appreciate. But Jamaica is well on track for recovery in this area. Well, Madam Speaker, just to indicate as I close that what is the exciting element of recovery is the revenue that we have earned, and that we are anticipating a record $4.2 billion revenue from tourism in the fiscal year 22-23, and that will exceed the 2019 earnings by some $500 million, and that's significant. Madam Speaker, I'd like to use the opportunity. No, Madam Speaker, I would like to use the opportunity to say congratulations now officially to our really newest minted double honorable Olivia Babsy-Grange, Deputy Leader of Government Business, on being awarded the Order of Jamaica. We're so proud of her. Equally, we want to officially now recognize the new commander of the Order of Distinction, Maurice Guy, MP, and the champion of champions, the 50-year-old veteran, Everett Clifford Warmington, CD. Madam Speaker, this augurs well, I think, for the quality of service and the recognition that a grateful nation gives for service well rendered by its subjects. Madam Speaker, today we will be focusing on the resolutions with regards to the ZOSO, and the Minister of National Security will pilot those resolutions at the appropriate time. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Announcement.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: report of investigation concerning allegations of impropriety and irregularity in the award of contracts, the issuance of licenses, and the implementation of projects by the Jamaica Dairy Development Board and or the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries. Report of investigation concerning allegations of nepotism, conflict of interest, impropriety and or irregularity in relation to contracts recommended and board appointments made by the Member of Parliament for Northwestern St. Elizabeth. Ministry papers numbers 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, and 87, and their respective resolutions in respect of the law reform zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Denham Town Community Zone social intervention, dated October 14, 2022, the law reform, the Norwood Community Zone social intervention from June 2021 to October 14, 2022, the Mount Salem Zone social intervention, the Savannah Community Zone social intervention, the Parade Gardens Zone social intervention, the Greenwich Town Zone social intervention, and the Augustown Community Zone social intervention dated October 14, 2022. Annual report on audited financial statement of the Jamaica Urban Transit Company Limited for the financial year 2017-2018. Annual report on audited financial statement for the Toll Authority for the financial year 2020-2021. And the Auditor General's Department Certified Appropriation Account, Head 72,000 for the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development for the year 2020-2021. And Head 72,000C, Ministry of Local Government and Community Development for the year 2020-2021.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers, reports from committees. Reports from committees.
Madam Speaker,
notices of motions given orally. Dr. Chang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that the next meeting of the House I'll move the following under law reform, zones of special operations, special security and community development measures Act 2017. 1. The law reform, zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Mount Salem community and environs in the parish of St. James zone, extension of period of operation number 5, order 2022 resolution. 2. The law reform, zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Denham Town Community Zone, extension of period of operation number 5, order 2022 resolution. The law reform, zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Greenwich Town Zones, extension of period of operation number 5, order 2022 resolution. The special operations, special security and community development measures, the Augustown Zone of extension of period of operation number 5, order 2022 resolution. The law reform, zones of special operation, special security and community development measures, the Norwood community in the parish of St. James zone, extension of period of operation number 5, order 2022 resolution. The law reform, zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Parade Gardens Zone of extension of period of operation number 5, order 2022 resolution. 7. The law reform, zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Savamar Zone extension of period of operation number 5 or the 2022 resolution, which were all laid on the table on October 19, 2022. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take these motions.
Questions and answers to questions.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the expiration of 21 days, I will ask the Minister of Health and Wellness the following questions.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained.
All right. Let me see one. Be short. Madam Speaker, in accordance with the requirements under law reform, zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, Act 2017, we are seeking to further extend the 7 areas currently declared as zones of special operations, ZOSO. These comprises the communities of Mount Salem, Denham Town, Greenwich Town, August Town, Norwood, Parade Gardens and Savamar, which are all expire on October 2022. Madam Speaker, reducing crime and violence and creating safer public spaces, enhancing human and community development are critical indicators of the zones of special operations. Communities are being transformed and residents now have hope and a level of optimism about their future and the future of their children. The human, social, economic, and infrastructural investment that are being made in these communities have renewed the hope of the residents, increased their agency, and restored a sense of safety and security within the space. The zones of special operations have served the people well. As we advance work in the build phase, we'll increase surveillance within these communities in order to provide an additional layer of safety and security for residents as we wind down some of the numbers of our security, of the security element. This is towards the sustained reduction of crime and violence within and around the communities identified. Madam Speaker, the policy of this government has and continues to be guided by continuous review and reassessment of our programs to ensure that they remain relevant to the needs of the people, and there is a set and evaluation, the necessary evaluation empirically and subjectively is carried out within the communities. In the coming months, we'll be undertaking in-depth assessment of the entire zones of special operation program. This will underpin future adjustments to the zones, which may include broadening of boundaries, and in some cases, as we move into the sustainable phase of the zones currently in operation. In the interim, of course, I wish to assure the residents of the vulnerable communities that have been earmarked as areas where there will be requirement of this kind of activity, that the government is sensitive to the level of violence, informality, and social decay that has taken hold in your communities over the years. The zones of special operations is but one of the tools that we are utilizing to provide increased safety and security to you and your families. As we implement Plan Secure Jamaica, the government is unapologetic about utilizing all available security measures and tools to safeguard the lives and livelihood of the people of Jamaica. Madam Speaker, with respect to the operational and community building strategy, the zones continue to transition along the clear, hold and build spectrum. Mount Salem and Denham Town will continue into the build phase. Greenwich Town, August Town, Norwood, Parade Gardens and Savamar will continue the hold phase for this period of extension. And of course, the build phase will begin during that time, will overlap. Madam Speaker, the ministry paper highlighting the activity with respect to the community building strategy have been laid in the House for review. My apologies, I think they're a bit late, but they're on the way. By means of highlighting some of the activities, let me emphasize, in Area 1, Mount Salem and Denham Town zones are in the longest declared zones of special operation and have collectively benefited from over some $700 million worth of investment. Mount Salem at the lower level, but a smaller community and a newer community, and significant work was done in terms of infrastructure that was entirely new, and work now moves into the phase of titling for some of the properties there and to complete the institutional supporting activities in the police station is complete, and we are looking at major work on the school. Denham Town is a bigger community, has had a little more money spent, $400 million, but there's a way to go in Denham Town. There has been some procurement delays, and their major programs are still yet to begin. We look forward to a number beginning, however, before the financial year is out, especially in the area of housing, which is a particular challenge in the Denham Town area. Soft work in terms of the schools will be initiated, and we'll continue to ensure their sustainability and genuine transformation. Essentially, Madam Speaker, the work plans remain on track. Greenwich Town and Augusttown have collectively received just over $250 million in capital expenditure. Over the next 60 days, the respective social intervention committees will continue to drive the process on the ground to ensure irreversible transformation in these communities. The Parade Gardens area requires significant and sustained investment to address issues that have stymied the community's growth and development for many decades. In the coming months, the Social Intervention Committee will finalize the work plan for Parade Gardens and confirm the required funding and begin them on the track for redevelopment and transformation. The Social Intervention Committee now is pursuing an aggressive work plan for intervention for the short to medium term. They are undertaking several critical initiatives that are positively impacting the lives of these residents. It should be of note, Madam Speaker, that now is an entirely informal community. I think it's the only one of here that has that kind of background. There is no area of Node in which they are operating that was part of any formal community. So much work had to be done in infrastructure. Much work was done before, and in fact the work now is focused on the soft side. 30 micro-enterprises received enterprise grants totaling $5.8 million in March 2022, and subsequently an additional 20 enterprises were identified for grant assistance in September 2022. These grants will be disbursed by December 31, 2022, and a total of 50 enterprise grants will be provided to Node residents this year, reflecting on their challenges. But there are communities that have a lot of significant entrepreneurial spirit. I would say so myself. For the South Lamar region, which is the most recent community to be declared in January 2022, the Social Intervention Committee, along with the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development, have partnered in formulating the development plan for South Lamar zone. The process remains dynamic and includes identifying critical priorities and the required fiscal support. The aim of the overall strategy is to ensure that when the zone transitions to the build phase, there will be agreed priority action ready for implementation. I mentioned the case of Salma, where the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development will play a significant role. We're at the phase, Madam Speaker, where we are moving to ensure there's a whole of government response. As JISTV leads the way, but we want to ensure that the work they do will be sustainable and carried on by the relevant government agency. It's a challenge that the Jamaica Social Investment has had faced before. Well, do work, invest significant funding, and the relevant state agency refused or just failed to accept responsibility. So water supply is built and gets locked down after the electricity, the bill is not paid because no one takes control after JC moves out. The school is fixed in terms of its physical facility, but very little is done, A, to maintain it, and B, to ensure that the curriculum become more relevant to the students in that area. Community center is built, and the SDC not being involved at the beginning is not there to ensure the continuity and sustainability. We are moving out of this and plan to secure Jamaica's approach of a holistic government approach is taking form, and will ensure that the investment in these communities will be sustainable and ensure effective transformation over time. Madam Speaker, equally important to the success of the zones of special operation is the implementation of a targeted operational strategy. As of October 13, 2022, for the period prior to and during the declaration of the respective zones, all communities recorded reduction in all major crimes, including murder. In Mount Salem, over the time, it's a 59% reduction, and where we have had significant numbers, there have been 2 short periods of spike. The police were able to intervene quickly and effectively, and we say the area has been maintaining a level of peace and quiet, even though residents are still wary of any ending of the level of security in place. Denham Town has been a 32% drop, significant for the community, but still a challenge. Unsatisfactory, but I indicated we have had some delays in executing a number of significant programs in the area. Work continues in evaluating and assessing what has worked, what needs to be changed, and how we're going to proceed into the community, because success, there has failure not an option in these cases. We'll ensure that there's success in effective transformation and ensuring continuing sustainable peace and public safety and good order in these communities. Augusttown, we have seen a 47% reduction. Again, that number is a bit low, but was as a result of one significant invasion at a particular point in time in which the security forces responded effectively, and we are now stable in there for several months. Greenwich Town, again, it started a pretty low number. I think it was 10 for the period prior to the institution of the zones of special operation. We have only had a reduction of 30%, but the character of violence and the community certainly can be evaluated, and there is a much greater sense of safety and as the work proceeds in the community. Again, the Member of Parliament Sprinter may wish to comment on it, but there's a different atmosphere, and we intend to continue the program and keep it on track. Now, see one of the more dramatic decreases to 63%. In fact, there has been only one, I think, for the time period, I think there was only one homicide in the entire year since the start of the 3, and 3 that evolved from one single incident. Otherwise, there has been a continuing atmosphere of peace and quiet in the community, which the residents are particularly pleased with. And I said there was one incident which resulted in 3 deaths over the time period. And I mentioned the incident, Madam Speaker. It's important to know when you have recurrent shootings and killings. It's a different that when one incident happens and the police can intervene quickly and reestablish stability and give the residents a sense of reassurance while maintaining their presence throughout. Parade Gardens have seen a 94% reduction in all criminal activity. Salvamar some 90%. But there is challenges on the peripheral areas, and we have to examine how we can prevent the continuation of that kind of activity in and near the zone of special operation. Similar situation exists in the Parade Gardens area, where areas near to central Kingston or the Parade Gardens area are coming under pressure, and they have been called for review of boundaries or at least review of operational activity in the areas surrounding the zone. The reduction of criminal activities improves social and infrastructural conditions, and enhanced economic prospects are key measures of the continued success of the zones of special operations. Acting on the advice of the National Security Council and in accordance with the law reform, Zones of Special Operation, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act, and in accordance with Section 5 of the Act, which guides that the Prime Minister and Council, after consultation with the Joint Command made by order, subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives, extend the period referred to in Section 4.3, the Mount Salem, Denham Town, Augusttown, Greenwich Town, Norwood, Parade Gardens, and Savlamar zones of special operations, special security and community development measures to be extended for a further period of 60 days. Madam Speaker, notwithstanding the progress made so far in the declared zones, the efforts must be continued and the stage for realization of desired outcomes. These continuous improvement These continuous improvement activities require further focused commitment and resources for immediate and long-term gains in order to ensure impact and sustainability. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Dr. Chang, we're in public business, so we omitted to seek the House.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the resolution which I gave earlier.
Members, the question before the House is that there is a suspension allowed the member to take the motions, notice of which he had given earlier. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Thank you, Dr. Chang. We omitted.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We on this side have consistently supported both the initial imposition and the 60-day extensions of the various zones of special operations which have been put in place over the years. The zone of special operations is a concept which embodies some flexibility. The approach that has been taken by the government is to use it in a very narrow way by focusing on small areas where there has been a flare-up. The difficulty with that is often there are neighboring communities that have similar problems which are not getting that type of attention or indeed expenditure. So you have a fairly lopsided focus on expenditure on critical social interventions as between communities which are really very similar, both in terms of the demographics, the lack of social investment, and the propensity for the breakdown of law and order and violent crime. I'm interested, Minister, if you could give an indication of what are the criteria in the government's mind as to when a zone of special operation which has been declared and extended will come to an end, because we've had a couple of them, I think, have been in effect now for 5 years or thereabouts, and some are more recent, of course. But we come here from time to time for these 60-day extensions, but in the meantime, the existence of a zone of special operations is an unusual state of affairs for any community to be in. Welcome though it is, no doubt, for those communities which have been racked with violent crime. But at some point, one would expect to return to legal normalcy, meaning that the zone would no longer be there and it would be regular policing which would take over. And I'm wondering what are the indicia, the criteria that the government has in mind as to when it would discontinue a particular zone, because, as I said, we've gone for some of them for quite a long time now, and there's no sign as to when they would end. I'm particularly concerned about the Parade Gardens zone of special operations, because although the minister has indicated a 94% reduction since the imposition of the zone of special operations in Parade Gardens, a 94% reduction in major crimes, including murder, the reality is that there have been continuing murders in communities adjacent to the zone, communities where there are gangs in operation which are integrally involved in the conflicts which involve the gangs in the zone. So that the way the zone is configured is really a problem, because it is not treating with the entirety of the issue, the gang conflict which is causing the violence in that area. And the violence continues. I visited communities right near the zone a few weeks ago where there had been murders after murders going on. And the people are living in fear. There are two main gangs in operation. the headquarters of one of the gangs is outside the zone. Doesn't make sense. I mentioned this to the Commissioner of Police from the beginning when that Parade Garden zone of special operations was first declared. And I was told it would be reviewed and so on, but we're not seeing any action. So I'd like to know why the zone is not extended to include the adjacent community where gangs operate, which are integrally involved in the conflict which gave rise to the zone being declared in the first place. Minister, I'd also like you to give an indication as to when the amendments to the Zone of Special Operations legislation, the ZOSO legislation, when they will come to Parliament. The Act was reviewed by a joint select committee of Parliament. Various recommendations were made in the report, which came here, was debated and approved, I believe. But we haven't seen the legislation come here to make those adjustments. So we have a situation where it's quite clear that a 60-day period is inadequate for any zone based on practice. So one of the recommendations is for that to be significantly extended, which we support. In fact, we were given a notice by Parliament that there would be no sitting of the House today or yesterday. And then subsequently we were told we had to come here because these ZOSOs are expiring, which I understand. But it just indicates the need to expedite the legislation to amend this so we don't have those kind of chaotic management of our time in this House. So, Minister, those are the main issues that I have. I'm sure at least one of my colleagues will have something to say on this. We support the use of zones. We'd like to see them deployed actually more extensively. We understand that the main concern is the fiscal cost, but the phasing of the expenditures necessarily has to be tailored to fit the available resources. But the security which a zone brings to a community that is fraught with high levels of violent crime, gang-related crime and murders, is a real paramount reason behind declaring a zone of special operations. There's other aspects of it, the social development, the removal of zinc fences, getting people to have birth certificates and TRNs, etc. That type of thing that can happen in any community where there's a decision to deploy those kind of resources. And there are many communities in Jamaica which need this, which are not getting it, while these particular communities are being prioritized. But the security aspect of it is a real rationale for the zone, along with the measures to hopefully transform those communities into safe spaces in the future. But the way it's being deployed, it has a very narrow focus, and there are many areas which need the kind of saturation policing which a zone involves with the support of the military. Hence the reason why I think the murder rate is up this year over last year. So that's a different approach to the tactic of the zone of special operation and how it's used. So, Minister, we support this extension. Again, I'd like to know what the criteria are for when a community which is under a zone will cease to be under a zone. What are the basic indicia of that? I'd like to know when the amendments to the legislation, which are much needed, with the experience of it having been in effect now for 5 years, when those will come to Parliament. I'd like to know what is to be done about the parade gardens, geographical delimitation of that zone, which is, in my view, deficient, and there is major problems in the adjacent communities. Killings are continuing, and it needs to be extended to encompass the entire area where that gang conflict is taking place. And also, I think we need a much broader policy on how we uplift vulnerable communities, both informal communities, but also traditional communities which have, through urban decay, have reached a point where infrastructure is poor and crumbling, street lighting is inadequate, garbage collection is woeful, and the other manifestations of living in that kind of situation are all too prevalent. we can't achieve what we need to in terms of moving the society forward to a more sustainable and cohesive way of life by just targeting a handful of small areas with this type of expenditure. We need a much more comprehensive approach to dealing with the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, perhaps I could start by following up on one of the points made by the Leader of Opposition and maybe suggest that when the reports come, if the reports could have a little bit more detail in terms of the goals that have been set for the ZOSOs, so that we could actually, as we get the periodic reports, follow the progress that is being made, I think it would also be helpful. So I want to say that. I join also with the Leader of the Opposition in terms of our position in supporting the motions that have come around ZOSO and the extension, although very clear that by themselves it is not a fulsome approach to dealing with crime. In fact, I well remember, but I've heard it so many times, quite frankly, from the Minister, talking about the southern band of Kingston and St. Andrew and the socio-economic conditions that are there, making them prone to being these areas where violence is commonplace. And therefore, it is not surprising that we have Parade Gardens, Denham Town, and Greenwich Town in that stretch. But I want to echo one of the points made again by the Leader of the Opposition, and I use as an example an area that I know well, which is the South St. Andrew Police Division. In a discussion a few days ago, we were having a conversation about what's happening in the division, now not just in the zone, but in the division. And I was reminded that based on the JCF data, we have 70 gangs there, with 45 of them being active. That is in the zone, the South St. Andrew zone. And I raise it because although we do have the Greenwich Town ZOSO, all around Greenwich Town, whether you're talking about Whitfield or you're talking about Seaview or you're talking, areas right there, we are still faced with criminal activities that sometimes tend to undermine the efforts that are being made in that limited zone of Greenwich Town, right, where the ZOSO actually is. And so I believe, Minister, that whereas the financial resources might not allow for the imposition of the full ZOSO across all these areas, the government needs to take a joined-up approach to development in these areas, whether it is with the Ministry of Education about what's happening in our schools and how we deal with our children who come from that area, go to school in those areas, so that there is also an intervention there with them so that you could curb even some of the activities that we see, the troubling activities we see in our schools come from children who are in zones that are fed day after day with the violent activities happening around them. I don't think this is the first time I would have said it, and I'll keep talking about it, that so often when these traumatic events happen, whether it is VPA or other agencies, they deal with the direct victims of these crimes. The children, the families, the others who were probably just sitting down but saw what happened, who are faced now, who are left now to live with the traumatic consequences of coming to terms with these activities as being commonplace, those go unattended. And I believe, especially in vulnerable communities where this happens on a regular basis, we have to begin to deal with that. More social workers to deal with that kind of psychosocial effect on our children in particular and other youngsters who are at risk and in these communities. So I want to make sure I say that. Heart NTA, Minister, prior to the ZOSO in Greenwich Town, the Member of Parliament for Southwest St. Andrew had counted on some programs on the National Unattached Youth Program. I have noted zilch, silence, complete silence around that. Now, in an area where we say that these are important activities to help to upskill individuals who are there, present them with an alternative path, yes? It should be an activity that is one that is a priority. How could we then have the ZOSO right there? And we cannot at this point count on a proper skills training program. I believe that that is indeed something that is lacking and that we need to address. We are clear, Minister, and you have come here, you have said it a number of times, that we do need the other developmental activities to take place in as much as we have the presence of the police and the heavy policing. So when we don't have those taking place in the kind of way that makes a difference, I become concerned. And of course, since the goodly people of Southwest St. Andrew are the ones who have sent me to Parliament, I am duty-bound to speak on their behalf. I have heard others come here and speak about decades when it seems as if there was no one before them. And what I do know is that often we come to Parliament, we make the representation, and we don't see the evidence of that on the ground in terms of programs. So what that means for me as a member of Parliament is that every time I come and I have an opportunity, I am going to talk about some of the programs that are needed. Minister, one final thing. You didn't mention it, but I know that we are preparing to do some violence audits and so on. And it is always amazing because sometimes we have so many different programs that take place in the same space, that at the same time too, that we are sometimes even unable to determine what is working and what is not working. And I'm pleased to hear you speak about looking at what is working and what is not working. I do hope that the sample size that we take to do that kind of audit is broad enough and that there is no narrow focus that will determine the targeted areas. And then finally, I want to say that the Safe Passage program that was instituted is really one that I wanted to applaud and one that I believe, even without being in a ZOSO, is an activity, is a project that can be replicated because there are so many of our schools that could benefit significantly from having a Safe Passage program as the Greenwich Town Primary did. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, it's not customary for me to speak on the zone of special operation debate. But funnily today, Madam Speaker, the community of Denham Town, as I speak, they're actually waiting on me, is honoring the work of the zones of special operations in the Denham Town community. They are showing their appreciation for the work of the security forces in building, sustaining peace in the constituents, in the area. Today is 117 days that the political constituency of West Kingston that falls in the Kingston Western Police Division has gone without one shooting or any murder, 117 days, which is a credit, Madam Speaker, to the efforts of the security forces working collectively with the community, using the political constituency of West Kingston, which falls within the police division of Kingston Western, which includes sections of South and Southwest St. Andrew. That makes up, right. So, Madam Speaker, some of the points made by the leader of the opposition, I concur, some by the member from St. Andrew Southwest. But you know, Madam Speaker, despite the limitations in the services, and I can say that the Denham Town and Anna Town communities have benefited significantly. We have had outside intervention, outside of the government structured program, Madam Speaker. And I have to use the floor of the Parliament to commend the members of the CDC in the division for helping to forge that bond with the security forces, Madam Speaker. And it is not just the various programs that the government put in that helps to make the ZOSO work. It is the commitment and involvement of the people within the areas that have contributed to the success of the ZOSO, Madam Speaker. I'm not saying that this is the answer, but it has worked, Madam Speaker, and I want to commend to the Minister of National Security and to my colleagues that those of us who have areas where the ZOSO exists and those who are advocating for an extension of the ZOSO must also understand that there are work that we can do as elected representatives also, Madam Speaker, involving the church. Huh? I don't know, but I'm just saying, involving the church, expanding the communities, Madam Speaker, because the schools in West Kingston that falls within the zones of special operation, Madam Speaker, I pay special attention to the needs of those schools within the ZOSO. So today, Madam Speaker, I want to commend the team in Kingston Western in the Denham Town area and in extension Anna Town and sections of Tivoli, and to commend and to support the extension of an additional 60 days for the zones of special operations. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, first let me thank my colleagues for the support given today for the continuation of the zones of special operation. I seek to comment and answer a number of the questions raised. First of all, I said the cabinet submission have been done on the amendments. I'm kind of taking them not in order. I too am looking forward to the important amendments being made. Some of them, as I said, is structurally, and my understanding, the very original concept of the zone, they were included, but I think there was some apprehensions, a new piece of legislation, and it was decided to bring the reporting aspect to a shorter time, to the 60-day period, but we will be moving it, a more extended period for this kind of operation. And the process is proceeding and expected to be expedited now. There are a number of things that we had to do simultaneously with limited human resources, but we're going to get it done. And I too would like to bring it to the House quickly, because I think the process, current administrative process, is cumbersome and not of significant value. But we are doing taking some other activities that we'll use in terms of reporting means to ensure this is done. Madam Speaker, it would be appropriate, without extending this debate for too long, to look at what we're doing in the zones. Because as I said before, as a government, we too are looking at a more rapid expansion but the concept itself, would remind the House, is not extremely new. In many ways, it goes back to when the concept of the CRP Community Renewal Program was articulated some 10 years back, more, by an earlier administration, and was looked at, and the communities identified then was based on the socio-economic services. I think the level of social services, in fact, as identified by the Planning Institute of Jamaica, and the vulnerabilities were identified. They still conduct that program on a more sophisticated base. Now we have a series of activities that is designed to identify the most vulnerable communities. And in fact, all those communities, in fact, would be communities which we have to look at for this kind of operation. In terms of the ones that have been identified to begin with some urgency, that revolve around the vulnerability to violence and the police statistics which came in those areas. So the social dynamic of the various communities have been identified. There's a peer publication which is done annually, in fact, which identifies the top 20 most vulnerable communities and then goes on to identify the other areas. The zones of special operation were designed to deal urgently with those that are experiencing an extremely high level of violence. And it has worked very well in terms of reducing the violence. I think the overall picture indicated when I was making my presentation, but the numbers are quite dramatic in terms of fall off in what you might say ultimate act of violence, is killing someone. And we are looking at all aspects of the work to see, as I said, what worked and what didn't work. But in terms of extending it too rapidly, immediately, the biggest, the most significant challenge is our sheer manpower, human resources. It is necessary, of course, that we started the program on a not necessarily a large scale at the very beginning, because you had to do the kind of work to have a proof of concept, if one may say that, because it is recorded and understood very clearly that the country, as a country, made significant investment in social intervention. Not small change. When the social intervention programs and education and social security are combined, there's huge amounts of money, much more than was required in, much more than was done in security or any other aspect of government. And the outcome was not as would like. In fact, we had very little outcome, because if you use violence and homicides to be measuring it, while that was happening, it continued to rise. It's not a matter of, and it went up over the last 40 years, really, overlapping different governments and small variations here and there. And therefore, the government has to examine how we can continue investment and begin to have sustainable changes, because it's pointless doing this, investing and not expecting to see permanent change. I had a personal view and interest, which I expressed earlier and had some contradiction. I said this. My comment on the impact of social intervention was reinforced by the studies done by Capri, which is still one of our best research institutions, as how it was spent. Because I am part of a constituency which, my constituency is part of a town which has had some of the most severe violence by any level, despite of what is, and the only person who could compare to me, my friend who spoke just before me from this side. But there's a stage when, in terms of, and where he's well aware and accepted what work has been done there, but Montego Bay at one stage, within a very limited zone, was experiencing well over 100 per 100,000 homicides per person, at its peak. But we also had almost a social intervention overload in the community like Flanker. Everything, every well-meaning, articulated program, government and non-governmental and service club and friends of somebody were in Flanker working. But when I got in there, the challenge remained as they were. We're better off today. And the comment made by a member from South Central is that some of the social investment work can proceed on the NSA is part of it. a lot of these work had been done before. What they lack was sustainability. There's a particular program that did infrastructure in the city basic services development program funded by the World Bank, which was led by Jamaica Social Investment Fund, which is why they are still among the best agencies for operating these challenged communities. Then they're followed by CSJP and others which did more soft side work. What we're seeking to do in the program is to combine and have what the member from the said, and a holistic approach to government in these areas, one, and two, to ensure that the agencies of government which are required to carry on the work are involved at the very beginning. The idea of doing a project that fixes a school, have some back-to-school treat over a 3-year period, provide the teachers with some amenities, and then leaving the school and the surrounding community as is, only mean a return to the same old within a very short time. What we have to have is that all the representative agents of government that are to be involved in sustainability are involved from day one. Hence, the creation by this government of not a front page organization and talk show. The Citizens Business Council, where all the permanent secretaries and all the heads of agencies meet on a quarterly basis to review the program and to ensure that the budget, that the work is being done by the agencies. And if it is not being carried out, where budget support is concerned, the agency will not receive the required funding until they proceed with it. It's not a matter of ignoring the work, no, they'll be brought to account and expected to make change necessary to execute. And all of this, Madam Speaker, is done on an empirical basis. Nothing that we do in this particular program is not data-based. So when my friends speak from Southwest St. Andrew speak of heart NTA, we are aware, and we will, in fact, the Social Intervention Committee will meet as early as tomorrow is the next sitting. It will be discussed, and the Business Council meets on Friday, and the witness here, because the heart NTA has been one of the most responsive and supportive, and they have in fact increased their targeted for they have in fact met their national target in terms of engagement of at-risk youths. We are having a challenge in meeting the targets in the zones of special operation, and we are examining that in depth. I had the privilege of looking at some of the data that we'll be discussing, and indeed there are some gaps from schools to public health, etc. We have just had a report on the need for psychosocial services for our for families and young people. There's a challenge in terms of finding the professionals, the social workers. We can't find social workers, and we're expanding that in relevant areas, but we need clinical psychologists. We need people trained and understanding the kind of doing that, and we need supervising psychiatrists. And it's not an area that is popular in Jamaica professionally, and we have to look at how we can recruit, use what we have, and look at how we can expand that, because just a matter of interest, Madam Speaker, the health service in Jamaica follows the Anglo-Saxon model, which does not give as heavy a weight to psychological counseling and that kind of, as the American model. But the world is smaller and culture is intermixed, and we are looking at changes there. And part of that, of course, when the Business Council meet, we discuss in the presence of the Financial Secretary, who is a member of the Business Council and operates from the Ministry of Finance, what is required by the various ministries. And in fairness, in things like personnel, there has been allocation of funding in the budget to hire the additional clinical psychologists, but they are not there. And now the Ministry of Health has taken some steps to engage nurses who are trained in mental health sector, along with social workers, to combine a team which will give us near what we want until we can get adequate numbers of them. So I said it has to go in a very, not a wilder phase basis. It's not a long phase. We take on what we can, get them settled in a new program, because to do things new in government can be particularly challenging. When we speak of them in Parliament or in the public space, everybody is happy and you get good commendation. Maybe get us some support politically, but that's not the object. The object of this program is to bring about effective change in the quality of service to the people in the community and to ensure sustainability. Effective change always brings apprehension to those who are involved. People are already involved in the field, whether it's educators or social workers. If we're going to make a change because we say things are not going right, those who are involved tend to take it personal. There's nothing personal in this. It's to look at the system, because to change what is happening in these 110, well, it's going to 110 communities now, and in the more challenged communities in Jamaica, it's going to take radical change, because clearly what has been happening has not been working. And therefore, we are going at it, I said, in a studied basis, and it'll be expanded rapidly very soon. But you could not just go and take on wholesale social workers, even if we could find them, and mental health workers for 100 communities in a system which was not geared to have engaged them and engage in a positive manner. And we might even have some resistance in bringing into curriculum changes in some schools, working to look at how we administer them, and all areas of the children's services that we have and social worker services. So we are not, in fact, in any way reverting to the old way or ignoring the challenges faced by other communities. In terms of the boundaries, the challenges, as indicated before, part of it was just shared human resources. Some of the social intervention work we're referring to will be done. There's a whole program for education across different areas, but in terms of the critical community with high levels of violence, we need numbers of security personnel on the ground. That's just a raw reality. It is, we'd like to move on more, but each time I have to be advised by the security chiefs, and I say, look, we know it needs to be done, but where are the men coming from? We have an aggressive recruitment and training program. I said in the last 12 months, well, in 2021, we were able to train 1,260 men for the police force, which meant a net gain of about 900. This year, the target is to go for 1,500. We do not think we have the capacity to train much more than that simultaneously, but we expect out of that to get a net gain of 1,000, because there will always be between 400 and 500 that is retiring. It's not anything to be getting unduly concerned about, because with that number, there's at least 300 to 400 who are going to retire anyway, by virtue of age and other impairments, and the other 100 will be people who have used the opportunity, which I have no problem with, as although the Minister of National Security, while in the police force, they improve their CV. And if they're not enough promotional space, which there won't be for everyone, some of them will move on to other jobs. Several directors in the Ministry of National Security are former police officers. In fact, as we will speak another time this house on something like a traffic ticketing management system, is eventually an officer who went and got technical training in telecommunications, etc., and is now assisting us in sorting out what appears to be a simple problem on the front page, but at the back end is fairly complicated and involved. And to get it all right, both within the law and technically, it took some time, but we're there now, and will be it's operational in a small area. We'll be making the island wide by January 2023. Police officer, director of technical services and major projects in the ministry. And there are a number of other areas. In fact, and I mentioned before, there was one who went off to the Bank of Jamaica, a senior officer, 3 times his pay as being a corporal. So that will happen. But we will gain, in the end, for the first time in the history of the police, an annual increase of between 900 and 1,000 to have the numbers to extend this. And we're also recruiting the army. So we'll have security personnel. Ultimately, we will not need all those officers with hope as we program operates, but we have to recruit them now, expand and ensure we bring increased public order and safety to the various areas. But given the level of violence, Madam Speaker, and I can conclude here, it is not just a matter of activities like the zone of special operation. And the reference to psychosocial services, to family services, educational services, public health, not in terms of but public health clinics for antenatal postnatal, prenatal care, and all the other things that go into the development of our people from conception to maturity, and creating a community in which people, there's cohesiveness and understanding requires more than just the police. What I'm saying, the areas in terms of what I've had high awareness and we have had social intervention without the security has not worked as well as we would. So we intend to provide a security cover. But in the long run, we have to make some radical changes too, not just provide security in how we provide social services to our communities to ensure their genuine transformation and their sustainability, because violence is not just a matter of poverty and law and order. There is deeper pathology within the community which we have to work on, and that's where we're heading in terms of what we do to ensure that our people will have the kind of public order and safety that is required. Madam Speaker, again, let me thank my colleagues for the support. And I said the government is committed to executing this plan in a very cohesive and continuous way to ensure we will reach the vulnerable people across Jamaica and in all the communities involved. And we intend in the process, as I said, to provide the security base on which we can guarantee not only public order and safety, but sustainability. The enhanced security measures, Madam Speaker, reflects the government's priority to work with all stakeholders to counter the crippling impact of social decay resulting in acute criminal violence in communities. Through the extent of zones of special operations, the government reaffirms its commitment to this kind of development and assures the communities which have been identified but not yet involved that they too will become a part of this program as we take the approach of holistic development to all challenged communities across Jamaica, including rural areas, as we move on. The issue of the financing, I can assure that the Minister of Finance, looking at the budget, will ensure that we can provide the fiscal space to do this on a much wider scale in time. But we have to do it in a manner that ensures that there will be no future assessment and article and research to say we have spent billions of dollars, it went nowhere. We are going to spend this money in a systematic, studied way, and we'll get the job done and ensure transformation in these challenged communities and improve public safety and good order. I thank you, Madam Speaker. And for this, I now seek your Minister of the House, the members, for the extension of the 7 zones as indicated.
Members, the question before us is that all 7 resolutions be approved. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Approved. Resolutions are now approved.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move for the recommittal of items, announcements, reports from committees, and motions, notices of motions given orally to facilitate the interim report of the Standing Orders Committee to be given by the Deputy Speaker of the House.
Members, the question before the House is that we have the recommittal of 3 items: announcements, reports from committees, and notices of motions given orally. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Also laid on the table of the House today are copies of the interim report of the Standing Orders Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the amendment to the standing order regarding the time for members' speeches in the State of the Constituency debate.
Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the interim report of the Standing Orders Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the amendment to the standing orders regarding the time for members' speeches in the State of the Constituency debate.
That is the item, reports from committees. Now we go to notices of motions given orally.
I will therefore announce at notices of motions given orally. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that the interim report of the Standing Orders Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberation on the amendment to the standing orders regarding the time for members' speeches in the state of the constituency debate, which was laid on the table of the House on the 19th day of October 2022, be approved. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So, public business.
Madam Speaker, let me just give the House a brief reminder of the Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Question before the House is that there is a suspension of the standing orders to allow the member to take the motion, notice of which she gave earlier. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
To update the House, in keeping with the mandate given to the Standing Orders Committee, a meeting was held on October 11, 2022 to deliberate the proposal for the amendment to Standing Order 32C. Standing Order 32C at the time gave a provision of 15 minutes for each member to speak as it relates to their constituency in the constituency debate done annually. The proposal was to have the time limit increased from 15 minutes to 25 minutes and an additional 5 minutes being requested where necessary to do so. The findings and recommendation of the committee was that this extension be allowed to facilitate increased discourse from each member of parliament as it relates to the various highlights of achievements or issues that they would like to present in respect of their respective constituency during their debate. The agreement was to submit, therefore, that the words be amended accordingly. A member shall be entitled to 25 minutes for that member's speech in the state of the constituency debate and may be permitted 5 additional minutes to conclude the speech with leave of this honorable House. I am not sure if there's anybody else who would like to comment on this report. I suspect quite basic. Leader of Opposition Business.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as you know, the meeting of the committee had a number of other matters to address, and we have decided that we will be meeting again to deal with issues related to questions. But in relation to this item, just to remind members that the main purpose of the debate, the constituency debates, really is to try to influence the national budget. And we did acknowledge at the meeting that the additional element of presenting a report has been viewed positively, but the time limit is still there. And we've had a number of presentations in these debates where we have gone way over 30 minutes. Again, just to remind that we want to get the people to be interested in what takes place here. And the level of interest, the level of attention, that span isn't everlasting. And that it is important
when we say it will be 30 minutes, that we try to encourage everybody to stick within that timeline so that we don't get back into a spate of speeches that are unending and might be boring. So I think we have to bear that in mind as we move to support this. But the main reason behind the debate is to try to get money allocated in our constituencies to deal with issues that affect the people who vote for us.
Madam Speaker, just to indicate, by way of reassurance, that the whole purpose of the constituency debate, as you will recall, is not only to facilitate the mirroring of achievements and to express the concerns and call on, from constituencies for development, but is also to bring to the attention of the crafters of the budget, the appropriations budget, to understand these particular needs as they exist in constituencies. It is true there are many, and they come from all areas, and the Minister of Finance has to do that difficult task of determining how to optimize and to prioritize and to ensure that we get the best bang for the buck. So yes, we are very moved and concerned to ensure that the statements made by our members of Parliament in relation to the needs of their constituency are in fact taken into consideration. Madam Speaker, I just wanted to indicate that this is a very critical part of the strengthening of our democracy and also of democratizing the budget process, is to enable the needs of the ordinary person within a constituency to be articulated in this chamber ahead of the crafting of the budget, so that it can be reflected therein afterwards. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I welcome the report that is tabled before us and have no difficulty with the recommendations. Madam Speaker, I know that I hear that the committee will meet to look at some other areas, and I would want to suggest that whereas when members get up, they really want to make a case for the activities and projects that they need, a compelling case such that the Minister of Finance might find it worthy to include it in the budget. I believe that we also have to be credible in what we say in this House. And I say, Madam Speaker, because outside the way we are often viewed in terms of, in a very disparaging way, and that it's a waste of time for many. When we come to speak here, one thing is to speak on a political platform with the hyperboles and the exaggerations. But when we come to the Parliament in a serious discussion about what's happening in our constituencies, I really find it I find it disrespectful, disingenuous, and not worthy of the House to hear members of Parliament stand and speak as if absolutely nothing was done before they went there. And I say it, I wondered whether or not I should have gotten up and said it, but I say it, Madam Speaker, because every single person who has come to this House has come with an intention to make a difference. Not all have made the kind of difference we would have wanted to see. No matter what has been done, there is still work to be done. And as we come and stand in the position, we must make the case. I was tempted to leave it alone because I know for a fact that many individuals outside are turned off by what is said in those kinds of ways. And when you do that, as a politician, if it is someone who is not from this side of the House, why should I bother? But I bother, Madam Speaker, because the reputation of the members who come and how we talk of each other as an example of how others speak of us, I believe is important. And so I wanted to place that on record. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, before the member for East Rural stands up, I'd like to just make a point. I accept the report that is presented, and I want to specifically say to the committee members that perhaps in their deliberations in the next time that you meet, while I think most persons, most members spoke from the position of asking the Ministry of Finance to increase the allocations of the CDF, which all of us in here support, I would also ask the committee to be mindful that not all constituencies are homogeneous in culture, size, demography, geography, and perhaps there could be a prorated approach to the allocations of the CDF when the Ministry of Finance is considering it. I think all of us as members have needs, and our constituents have different needs. Some need bridges, some need more roads, some need more local roads than NWA roads. But also in the deliberations at the committee, there must be real sharpness in recognizing that each of us who's sitting here have different complexities that we have to deal with on a daily basis. And from what I have seen in this financial year in particular, there are 2 ministries, member from East Rural St. Andrew. There are 2 ministries in particular that deal with water. Actually 3. There is the Ministry of Local Government, there's the Ministry of Water, and there's the Ministry of Economic Growth. And sometimes it's the Ministry of Agriculture. So also in the highlighting, maybe perhaps the Parliament needs to have, because I know that there's not a lot of staff to really govern the committees and extrapolate some of the information coming out from all of the reports. But it might be helpful to take everybody's constituency report, go through what the attendant issues are, and come up with some new policy frameworks for the Ministry of Roads, water in particular, and how you really access welfare benefits even through the CDF. And so that is a whole nother situation that coming out of the report, they might have to look at the CDF exigencies, because sometimes the agencies member don't also work fast enough for even things to be submitted, like for Christmas work in particular. So I accept the report, but I'm asking as well that in your deliberations, you consider all of the reports and the statements that came from members very succinctly, and identify how your committee, whether it goes forward or not, in the presentations of the 30 minutes. No, the committee, the Standing Orders Committee member is looking at the 30 minutes. I'm actually saying something else on the 30 minutes. Yeah. And I think the Speaker has allowed me the time simply because she's also agreeing that there are some things that need to come out of it. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm going to take the opportunity to wrap up what was a statement as it relates to deliberations on standing orders, and not the content of various individual speeches. Madam Speaker, I close the debate on the motion and ask that it be approved.
Members, the question before the House is that the motion brought by the member be now approved. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The motion has been approved.
Madam Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today. In moving the motion of adjournment, would like to thank the members for coming back to the House today in the break that we gave for the Heroes celebrations. And I know that it took a little bit of sacrifice on the part of many to be here, and especially the very sudden call that I made to the opposition House leader I'm grateful that he responded well. I think the leader of the opposition is not as perhaps fulsome in his own response in that. I understand the difficulty that he might have had to face to make it here today. But we are happy that the team was able to come so that the business of the people can be had. And just to remind us all that doesn't matter when we adjourn, and usually we adjourn for a date to be fixed. That date to be fixed can be fixed anytime as the exigencies of the people's business require. And so we would respond immediately to deal with the people's business.
Just before you adjourn, I do want to endorse what the House leader has said, and just to comment that I find always that the leader of the opposition business is usually very cooperative with whatever happens to make this House.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I see him smiling over there. You know, not quite as accommodating as the leader of the opposition. Madam Speaker, I therefore move that the House be adjourned until Tuesday, October 25th at 2 p.m. the George William Gordon House, when there will be the continuation of the State of the Constituency debate, and the speakers will be MP Michelle Charles, Honorable Frank Witter, and MP Daniel Lawrence. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Question before the House is that the House do adjourn until next week, Tuesday, the 25th of October, 2022. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This House is now adjourned.